Community Q&A Live is on air. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Michael Berkman. I'm the Greens MP for the state seat of Maiwar, which I assume you probably know if you've made it this far already. Thanks for being here. Before anything else tonight, I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the stolen lands of the Agro and Turrbal people. I want to acknowledge them as the rightful sovereign of this country and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and commit to continue to work with emerging leaders as we take some really important steps over the next few years towards proper recognition of First Nations sovereignty and treaties with First Nations. We're here in Indooroopilly, which is itself one of the, it's a First Nations traditional name for the area. It means Gully of Leeches, and we've got a few of those around here in Toowong and Taringa, and the name of the seat, even Maiwar, is one of the names First Nations people used for what we call the Brisbane River now. So, look, I guess just to zoom out a little bit, the purpose of these online Q&A sessions was to just provide an opportunity to engage with people, going right back to the earlier days of the COVID pandemic, when we had to kind of shut down all of our standard community engagement channels. This became an invaluable way for me to keep in touch with people and to answer questions in real time. I guess it's one of the legacies of the pandemic, even though I think yesterday at midnight last night, officially the health emergency period lapsed, but we've tried to keep it up just so that folks who can't make it into the office at the normal times, or if it's more convenient for people to kind of engage, ask a few questions. We have received some questions in advance, which is great. I very much appreciate that, but keep them coming. If you pop a question in the comments, I might not see all of them, but I'm being very ably assisted by some of my team here who'll kind of flag some questions or comments for me. So please let us know where you're from. It's always nice to just kind of root the question in that that location, a bit of normal humanity rather than all this being online. I'll be on here for about an hour, give or take. So we'll try and get through as many questions as we can in that time. And I'm being told that my name online is Test. That's unfortunate, but look, it's all just a test, really, when you get right down to it. Look, I guess I was going to just touch briefly on a few local issues before we get started, and while anyone's posting questions. In terms of local campaigning, we've had a bit of a focus on public transport recently, largely because the council's launched what they described as a network-wide review recently, which is intended to kind of streamline and improve the bus network to better align with the new metro as it rolls out. But it kind of seems like the West Side's been a little bit overlooked in that. There's very little in the way of new services or changes that are much use to us here. But we're still looking at a few particular areas where services are particularly bad. So Long Pocket is one example of that. There's a really substantial new retirement village called Somerset that's been constructed there and is still under construction. So a lot more residents going in there. In addition to that, there's a new estate on Jacaranda Place. So a lot more people moving into that area, and the service is pretty terrible. It only runs every hour and a quarter. On the weekend, peak times, its best is every 30 minutes. And it also doesn't really connect up with the Indooroopilly bus stop, which is getting a bit of an upgrade now. So we've suggested that they are more frequent services, and there's been some discussion with locals about whether the service could be extended to better service the Somerset Retirement Village and or get down to Sir John Chandler Park. And additionally to connect up directly with the Indoor Busway. We've also been talking to folks out at Fig Tree Pocket about the 430 and the 445 service and how they could be improved. Again, just because they're only running as, the best is every 30 minutes at peak times. There's some issues with the buses not being, they're kind of running coincidentally. So where they could be separated out to better serve the area. that's not happening. So we've had some discussions with TransLink about that. Again, pushing for more frequent services and some improvements to the alignment there as well. But really what these campaigns come down to is local engagement. Like, it's a way for us to check in with you, find out what you need. And if we're going to get results, we really need the community to participate and to give their feedback directly to the Transport Department and Council, because there's shared responsibility for buses. You know, the State Transport Department and TransLink take care of the funding and the timetabling, but they're delivered by Council. So we've really got to work across levels of government to get those services improved. And we need to demonstrate that the demand is there, because, you know, Council, or TransLink actually, more importantly, will just say, you know, they treat it, the buses that aren't being used as frequently a lower priority for them, but they somehow manage to miss the fact that if the service is rubbish, people aren't going to use it. So we need to make these improvements where people are to meet them where they are and actually provide something useful. One other little local campaign we're running is around the busway on Lambert Road, down just down near the school, so at the front of Indra and St Peters. Everyone knows that the traffic in that area is an absolute nightmare, and so providing better active transport infrastructure is a really important way to make it safer, particularly for cyclists and for pedestrians, and to minimise the number of families that have to use a car. So there's been plans in the works, or, you know, on the council planning documents for some years now, to kind of fill the gap between the new Riverwalk and the bikeway at the Esplanade at UQ. So that missing link there is called the stage 3 and 4 bikeway. So council wants it built. They've made some requests to the state to get some money to help them out, but they haven't been successful yet. So we're just trying to ramp up that campaign again. To provide that missing link. It really is one of the most important parts of the River Loop that needs to be filled in, so that, you know, I know that certainly from my experience as a parent of an Indra High student, I would love to see him riding to school more often, but that section is a real worry, along with another stretch between the Centenary Motorway Bikeway and the Riverwalk. So we've really got to fill those gaps so that cyclists feel safer, and that parents like me can feel safer to send their kids off to ride to school. So yeah, anyway, check out the website. There's plenty of information on those, and if you're interested in signing the petition or keeping up to date, that's a good way to do it. Just a couple more things before we launch into the questions and answers. There are a few community engagement activities going on over the next little while. One of the most important ones I'd like to flag is the Communify. Their Christmas market is coming up. So every year they put together this absolutely fantastic, market day where disadvantaged folks, anyone who's kind of struggling in the lead up to Christmas, can come along. They can, collect a whole bunch of non-perishable food and Christmas goodies and toys for children and young adults. So they go on a bit of a collection drive at this point. So we've got just over a month until they kind of close off their donation. So we operate as a drop-off point. You can drop them straight to Communify, but it's kind of simpler for them if we can kind of concentrate some donations here to do a single pickup. So any non-perishable foods, snacks, treats, good stuff, whatever you'd like to have at Christmas, and presents for kids right through to teenagers would be really appreciated. I know that they're particularly keen on toys this year, because one of the storage facilities that did have a bunch of toys that had been put aside in previous years was flood damaged earlier this year. So I was speaking to Communify just today. So please drop off any toys and foodstuffs you would like to. The latest round of Maiwar community grants has just closed. We're working through all of the applications, and we'll be announcing the grant recipients really soon. It's wonderful and terrible at the same time that we've had so many applicants this time that we are unfortunately not going to be able to give everyone a grant, but there's some really impressive stuff going on in the community. So thanks to everyone who put in their application, and we'll get back to you ASAP. And beyond that, remember that the May Warriors grants for school-aged children are always open. So those are smaller grants, up to $500 for kids to put into practice a social justice or environmental sustainability initiative. ideally in their school, but not necessarily. We're open to hearing any suggestions that are coming from school-age kids around the electorate. A couple of little events coming up soon. I've got a seniors morning tea tomorrow morning, actually, at St Andrew's Anglican, just down the road at Indooroopilly. It's between 10:30 and 12, so it's open to all and sundry. It's not exclusively a seniors morning tea. We're going to be down on the corner of Lambert Road and Carnarvon Road on Thursday morning this week, on Thursday the 3rd, from 8 to 9 in the morning. So the idea is that we'll be there just to have a chat with folks about the Lambert Road bikeway and public active transport and traffic issues around the area more generally. I'm also going to be at a Diwali event on Saturday at Indra State High School. So that runs from 4 through till 8. So there's a bit in the calendar, a busy run up till Christmas from here. Look, I'll jump past updates from Parliament. We've no doubt come across some of that stuff in the Q&A. So keep the questions coming. I think we can do with some more. We've got a few questions. In fact, they are coming in. Good work. Thanks, everyone. All right, I'll start at the start, though. We have first question is from Wishnish on Instagram. How can we make public transport free to be able to encourage more people to use it? Love it. Great question. You may have been paying attention to Green's policy in recent years. We would absolutely love to see free public transport, because we know that low cost or free and frequent and reliable public transport is essential to entice people to use it. And it will take an awful lot of pressure off families who are doing it tough, and has the potential to really transform the way Queenslanders get around. At the moment, the amount that the state recovers in fares, the amount that's paid in fares, is only about 10% of the total cost of operating the public transport network. So in that context, it really doesn't make much sense to keep accumulating, like to keep charging those fares, when that in itself comes with a whole bunch of extra costs. So at the last election, we proposed free public transport, which would have been funded at least in part by scrapping the expensive privatised ticketing system that's been rolled out more recently on TransLink networks, and also reducing the amount of spending on the costs associated with fare evasion, so policing and court costs and the like, which are really quite substantial. If you put those together with a cut in the road widening budget, which is an extraordinary spend, then we can easily fully fund public transport and make it free for everyone. So back at the last election, we think it was crucial then, and times are even tougher now. Cost of living pressures have only increased recently, and fuel costs in particular. So it's something that we absolutely think should be done. This is something that just as recently as last week, I raised in Parliament again, but we're not seeing much interest from the state Labor government at the moment. They're still way too invested in the idea that someone's got to pay, nothing for free. Frankly, it's just a bit silly in a public transport system where the state is already covering 90% of the operating costs. Why would we not go all the way there and make it free, make it simpler, minimise all of that hassle with ticketing and fare evasion? But look, we'll keep the pressure up on that. It's something that I think we should see. We wouldn't be alone if we were to implement free public transport, but that's definitely on the agenda. We'll keep working on it. Thanks for the question. Next one from Goals Soccer on Instagram. I think I know who this is. Craig, I'm looking at you. Because the question is, chances of getting a synthetic field built at Gregory Park, Milton. Look, it's a nice idea. I know why Craig in particular has an interest, does some excellent kids coaching work there in the mornings. That's an interesting space there at Milton, because obviously it's used by Milton State School. That's their primary school oval, their only school oval, in fact. But it's a council-owned park. Now, I guess that's why I don't think it's super likely that council's going to install a synthetic field there. That's not particularly common in council parks, and I haven't heard any any suggestions of plans for this. Although there are a few little upgrades going on there with the playgrounds and some. There will be some additional sports courts going in at Milton State School sometime soon, I believe. But look, Craig, Pastor and Matter of Council, I'd recommend you get in touch with the councillor for more info. So that'd be Peter Mag is the councillor in that neck of the woods. Next question. Question from Dave Banks on Twitter. I'd like to know when Bixby expects Queenslanders to get access to legal cannabis, just like millions overseas have, and as recommended by the Queensland Productivity Commission. Also, when will Parliament provide prescription patients with a home grow amnesty as recommended by the Australian Senate? Excellent question. Just for those who are scratching their head about Bixby, who the hell's Bixby? Bixby's our cat. And in some of the promo, committed to answering any questions about Bixby or anything. Just so you know, Bixby did have some surgery recently. He actually just lost an eye, but he's now a very cool pirate cat, and he seems a lot more comfortable than he was before the surgery. But anyway, Bixby, by the by, excellent question though about legal cannabis. Don't know what Bixby thinks about it, but this is something that I've been pushing for in the state parliament, and our New South Wales Senator David Shoebridge has been pushing for the same in the federal parliament. You've probably heard the most recent developments in the federal space, where David got some legal advice that this is an issue, that a bill to legalise cannabis could be introduced and implemented nationally. So in effect, that would override all state legislation that criminalises the use and possession. So the scope is there. While this has predominantly been treated as a state issue in the past, it could certainly be dealt with federally. So while the Greens are going to continue to push in both state and federal parliaments for the legalisation of cannabis, if in either of those jurisdictions, for a bill to pass, it would require the support of Labor governments. So there's no indication at this stage, despite questions I've asked over a number of years now, there's no indication that they intend to legalise or even to decriminalise cannabis. But there's a growing number of voices who are pushing for this, and you raised one of them, Dave, the Queensland Productivity Commission. It's not exactly renowned as being a particularly progressive or out there kind of source of policy advice, but in a report they released back in 2019, they recommended that that cannabis and MDMA could both be legalised, and in fact that the position was that they should be, in order to save the state a whole bunch of cost in policing, and obviously once there's a scheme set up for the legalisation regulation of it, then governments can tax that, which provides for much better provision of the kinds of health supports that that people might need if they're engaged in problematic drug use. But of course, we know that isn't the case for a huge number, the vast majority of people who do use currently illicit drugs. So look, I hope I've answered that question. Home grow amnesty, that's a good question. It's not something that we've taken head on, but it sits alongside the question of legalisation, along with other issues like the Drive Change campaign. At the moment, we've got this, basically any medicinal cannabis patients, if it's a product that contains THC, they can effectively just be prevented from driving almost indefinitely, because you can't drive with any trace of THC in your system. That can last for many weeks, or I've had it suggested to me potentially months. So if you're using the medication, even if you're not at all impaired, as in there's none of the psychoactive effects are still being experienced, you can still be pinged. You're not supposed to drive. So the suggestion from advocates there is that it needs to be similar to alcohol, where there's an actual where there's some gauge of impairment, or instead you can simply create a defence that provides that if that the offences around drug driving only apply where the driver is impaired. But anyway, yes, there's lots of work to do in this space, and I don't don't think anyone who's been paying attention can miss the fact that the Greens are super keen to see reform going on as soon as we possibly can. So great question, Dave. Thanks for raising that. One question from Nathan Cochran on YouTube. Have there been any developments with the new West Side Primary School? Excellent question. One of, if not the most topical local issues that we've had to deal with in the last few years. For anyone who missed this development, back in August, I had a meeting with the Education Minister. There'd been a kind of slow, very slow progress around proposals for where they might put this new primary school. There's no debate that we need a new primary school in the Inner West, and it was the state had announced it was going to be at the old Toowong Bowls Club. At this meeting in August, the minister let me know that the government was reconsidering that location for a variety of reasons. The ones she named specifically were all those reasons that the community and I had been raising for a long while, and I guess so. Those included things like flooding. It's well known to be a flood-prone area. It is immediately adjacent to Perrin Park, and it's the location of the club itself. So that itself is a community facility. So impacts on that green space, the protected flying fox colony, which is right along Toowong Creek. And obviously traffic is going to be an issue for any school, but this is very close to Freixenel Drive, one of the busiest roads in all of Brisbane. So, I mean, all of these issues have been raised time and again by the community. It seems, though, that the minister, having kind of been to the site herself and eyeballed it after the floods and seen how close to the flying foxes it was, that was enough to drive the point home that it was an inappropriate site. And to be honest, we were so desperately in need of a new primary school a couple of years ago that I thought this would just they'd forge ahead and push through and build it there because that was the solution that they'd picked. As it happens, COVID's kind of taken some of the enrolment pressures. They've eased a little bit in those couple of years. So some more upgrades to the existing local schools will kind of fill the gap for the time being while they go back to the drawing board and look for another site, a more appropriate site. Look, that's a bit frustrating, but I guess that's where we're at the moment. We don't know where they're planning to put the school. We've continued to discuss with the department some of the ideas that we've put forward, but I can understand that there was some concern from folks who thought that once they'd scrapped the Bowls Club site, they'd just revert to the Indooroopilly State High School. I think that's pretty unlikely. I put it in no uncertain terms to the minister and the members of her team that were there that this isn't something I'd support. It's not something the community would support. I raised the suggestion again of the old Sullivan Nicolaides site where Tricare is proposing to develop their retirement facilities at Taringa, and it's a smaller parcel of land. So it might not be appropriate for a bigger, sort of 900 student capacity that they were ultimately looking at. But I think it could do the job for a smaller school. So anyway, we're throwing all these suggestions around. Ultimately, we need something that's as close as possible to where the old Taringa State School used to be, which is just where near the train station where Morrow Street splits off Moggle Road. So yeah, anyway, that's actually a really pretty simple question with a very, very maybe unnecessarily long answer. But no new developments aside from we're back at the start, looking for something that's at the right location, that's big enough. Ultimately, I don't know that the state's going to find a way around having to acquire some, whether it's residential or commercial property in the vicinity. That seems to be almost the inevitable end point for this. But yeah, thanks for the question, Nathan. Next question is from Dylan on Facebook. Dylan says, we know it's a council thing, but would love your support to get a skate park at the old Toowong Bowls Club. Fair enough. That's as far as I'm aware, we don't have a skate park in Maywar. There are some that are not too far away, but obviously it's a pretty big electorate. You've got to go some distance from any of the local suburbs to get to one. So I would definitely love to see one in Maywa. I haven't heard of a proposal for this to happen at the former Bowls Club site. But previous community surveys that we've done, and even just engagement from students at schools, like I've had a few people come to me and ask directly, like, can we get a skate park? So it's certainly something I'd support. There seems to be strong community interest in it. And I guess maybe this is something that we could consider for a more direct campaign in the lead up to, to the elections that are coming in the next couple of years. These are, again, like the old Bowls Club site, it is council lands, the park space that you're going to look to put a facility like a new skate bowling would generally be council. So it's something for us to maybe think more about and put some pressure on council as we approach that 2024 election. But yes, I would love to give you my support to get a skate park, the old Toowong Bowls Club, or wherever else we sensibly can. So thanks for the question, Dylan. Next one is from Jason on YouTube. Jason says, was wondering where the birth certificate reform stuff is for trans people to be able to change their gender marker, and was wondering if it would be free because some people can't afford that. Really great question, Jason. And at the outset in answering, I just want to give some recognition to Esther, who's a local constituent here in Maywa, who put forward the first parliamentary petition, certainly that I was aware of on this, and I sponsored that petition in Parliament. When I last asked the Attorney General about it, she committed to introducing legislation before the end of this year. There have been some kind of loose timeframes thrown around before that, but that's the most recent indication we've got. We've also heard through some stakeholders that there is a draft bill that's been circulating a bit. So it may be that sometime in the next we've got only 2 sitting weeks left before the year finishes. So it could be introduced before then. We are expecting that most fundamentally it's going to remove that. It's going to remove the existing requirement for surgery, for gender reassignment surgery, before updating those gender markers on the paperwork, and more generally just provide some more options around that paperwork for gender diverse folks. But there's been no indication at this stage about how the cost, how the cost would be dealt with. But it's a good point. Except that cost is always going to be a barrier for some people. So it doesn't seem like making an update to have official government paperwork reflect your lived experience is something that that should cost you money. So that's a really good observation. Something we'll keep an eye on and raise it as we see a little bit more progress on this. With any luck, very, very soon. Next question. Question from Aiden on Facebook. G'day, Aiden. It's been a while since we've had a chat, but for anyone who's not Aiden and wouldn't know this, Aiden is a very, very eager young public transport enthusiast who put together just an incredibly comprehensive, complete rewrite almost of our local bus system. But anyway, on to the question. Aiden says, I caught the 471 bus from Mount Cootha to the city a few weeks ago and had a great chat with the bus driver about transport planning and politics. He brought up an interesting point that I didn't think about. Whenever council or the state government redo the bus network, they don't talk directly to the drivers. I'm not sure if you know him. He said he's emailed you. I think I do know this driver you're talking about. But I'm interested to know if you've consulted any drivers for Brisbane Transport about our bus network. Also, I've got my bush care group up and running out. Awesome. Nice work, Aiden. An absolute champion. This guy, he's a mover and shaker and community leader of the future. So thanks for your work, mate. To answer the question, yes, we have had a few interactions with some local bus drivers over the years. I do remember some emails specifically about local routes, including those that are servicing Mount Cootha. It is really interesting to learn that they're not consulted during the network reviews, because obviously, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer that the folks sitting behind the wheel and, engaging with passengers like you and actually seeing the network in action day in, day out, they certainly would have some valuable input, I think, for a review like that. So look, the way these reviews take place is a little bit opaque, as is the case with so much public consultation on all sorts of issues. But we do know, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, our most recent discussion we had with representatives of TransLink, they made pretty clear that that they are paying attention to how much contact they get from the public. So, it's that old chestnut where any single email is not going to be enough to persuade them that they need to make a change to the network. But if they are getting really frequent feedback about particular routes or black spots or issues with the network, they will be paying attention to that, and that will feed directly into how they prioritize different issues that they know need to be addressed. And I've got to say, I really appreciated some pretty frank feedback from the TransLink folks about that when we spoke to them last. They don't get to decide what budget it is that they have to work with, and I have no doubt that that in their ideal world, the transport planner, they would fix a whole bunch of issues if they were given the budget. So I guess the challenge is for us as the community and as elected representatives to keep the pressure up, to keep building that case within the community and directed at the Minister and the Treasurer, those who are holding the purse strings, to sink more money into the transport networks. So I think, keep badgering them. We'll keep running these kind of discrete campaigns on issues that people raise with us, because while I don't have any direct say over the outcomes, we have seen some wins. Like we've had some changes to bus routes, particularly school bus routes, in the last couple of years. So yeah, keep the feedback coming, and thanks for the heads up, Aidan. I'm a little bit surprised to hear that the drivers didn't get a say, but that's something for us to feed into our future conversations with the Minister and the department. Okay, moving on. Thanks, Aidan. Comment here from Dreamtime Aroha on Facebook. Bro, just want to say thank you in your work with youth justice. Kids don't belong in cages. Yeah, so true. Look, I'm really, I've got to say, I feel, first of all, kind of distressed and disgusted that this is, simple things like raising the age of criminal responsibility above 10, 14 is what the international standard says. But the fact that we've still got to do this work is pretty shocking. And I wish it was done. For anyone who hasn't been following, I put up a private members bill that would have done just that. So raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 14 and made that change alongside a whole bunch of changes for, culturally appropriate, community and place-based, alternative approaches to dealing with problematic behaviour in kids. Because we know that the simple reality is that kids' brains don't work like adults' brains do, and so we can't expect that the same kind of punitive criminal responses to kids are going to achieve anything for them. In fact, the evidence all suggests that every time a young child, and the earlier they encounter, cops and courts, and particularly detention, the more likely they are to experience worse outcomes. So anyway, it should be really straight up and down. We're not meeting our international human rights obligations, and our obligations just to these kids as humans. So look, it's been such a privilege to work alongside all of the organisations who are in this space. That there are some absolutely amazing advocates. I'll make a particular shout out to Maggie Munn, who has just been great to work with, and is a local here around Toowong as well. So but thanks for the comment. It's always encouraging to get this kind of feedback. Next question from Jason on YouTube. What can be done for justice reinvestment? We're seeing so many systemic problems with police force, and the government is planning a new youth detention centre when we need a different approach. Yeah, look, could have read ahead and seen that one come in when I was talking to Dreamtime Aroha's comment before. But look, I mean, justice reinvestment is kind of at the core of that whole alternative approach. The amount of money that is spent on policing and prisons for kids, particularly those really young kids, if you were to divert all of that funding to provide the kinds of, real support for kids that they need. So instead of treating them like naughty kids who need to be punished for doing the wrong thing, if we actually, if the government and we as a community more broadly were willing to actually engage with them as small people, as people who have their whole lives ahead of them and who are more often than not, some of the most disadvantaged kids in the entire state. Basic things like justice reinvestment talks to investing in support workers to engage with kids, to help them get to school, to make sure that they've got somewhere safe to live, to make sure that they've got 3 square meals a day, that sort of really simple stuff. One of the most tragic things that we hear about, that I've heard about when I've been involved in the kind of committee processes around this youth justice reform, so-called reform that the government keeps proposing, is that a lot of these really young kids, they find themselves almost inclined to go back to youth detention because it's the place where they've felt safest in some respects. So anyway, it's a shocking indictment on the way that we're treating disadvantaged kids and youth so-called justice generally. But justice reinvestment is just redirection of those funds. Stop doing the things that we know don't work. I think everyone almost universally agrees that the current youth justice system is not working, and put that money, rather than building new detention centres or just expanding all of those youth prisons that we've got, put that money into the alternative, place-based, community-driven, the Aboriginal controlled community organisations tend to be the ones that are, most in need of supports all over the state. But and that's really what's necessary to kind of overcome, the legacy of deeply entrenched racism in our criminal system and in our, policing outcomes. Look, really great question. I suppose, bottom line is that we just need, we need to see governments changing, in putting up the political will to actually to push change through, because when you're allowing your policy settings to be dictated by the Courier Mail and by conservative shock jock commentators, this is where we end up, I suppose. So anyway, the bill I put forward didn't pass, but we're going to keep, it's an issue that we'll keep fighting on, and just aiming to continue to highlight the breaches of human rights in youth prisons and in adult prisons, and keep pressure on government to, to end shocking practices like solitary confinement of children, and, work to address these issues through a harm reduction lens. And prevent kids being held in prisons and in watch houses. So anyway, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's occupied a lot of my time in the last little while, but I'll move on. Thanks for the question, Jason, and for the commentary, Aroha. Sonia on Facebook asks, or says, live in Taringa beside Indro State High School. The impact of the Indro roundabout is horrendous after 3 p.m. every day, but now Swan Road is a single lane. The road rage is becoming dangerous. Have contacted James Mackay, who's referred it to transport. That'll take 4 to 6 weeks. Is there anything more that can be done? Yeah, that sucks. Yeah, sorry to hear it, Sonia. And I think I recall you popped into the last pop-up office we had when I was there at Indro Shopping Centre with Libby. I mean, I've got to say, I'm not super impressed with the way the whole roundabout upgrade process is being conducted, and fundamentally the whole idea of spending as much as they are on that roundabout. Like, sure, we would never build a roundabout like that, if we were starting from scratch, but it's ultimately going to save less than a minute on the inbound and outbound peak times. So back in 2019, I said my bit, wrote to the Lord Mayor, urging them to prioritise dedicated bus lanes and safe cycling infrastructure and better pedestrian access all around that precinct as part of the upgrade. Because obviously, Moggill Road's a major road. A lot of people could be using it for active transport if it wasn't so bloody unsafe. And the number of people who want to access the indoor shopping centre by foot is pretty huge too. But again, this kind of active and public transport infrastructure was essentially ignored in favour of very car-centric infrastructure. I will say that you've taken the right approach in contacting James. I'd say as well that if other local folks have had issues with this, get in contact with them as well. It's the more residents that contact council and kind of push to have this escalated up to their transport planning unit, the better. Like that's the way that we'll get some outcomes on this. It is a council controlled road rather than a state controlled road. So there's little that we can do directly by intervention with the state department. But look, you could always try emailing the minister as well. But I think council really is the right kind of avenue for you to raise your concerns there. Wow, we got lots of questions. It's good. Oh, no. Okay, now we're getting through them. We're getting through it. Okay, I got a comment here from Deanne on Facebook. Queensland, under the ALP Anastasia Palaszczuk government, recently became an international human rights embarrassment for legislating to block access to the United Nations subcommittee on their tour of Australia to mental health facilities in Queensland, in total disregard for its obligations under the Optional Protocol on Convention Against Torture, or OPCAT, as it's called. Yeah, really great point, Deanne. Look, you might have seen, other folks might have seen that I asked about this in Parliament last week. It was a bit of an unusual exchange because they're obviously feeling the heat on this particular issue a bit. The Premier, I asked it directly to the Premier. She had a very unusually well-prepared, short, sharp, scripted response ready for this. So they're obviously a bit tetchy. And as part of that answer, the Premier committed to introduce new laws to better implement OPCAT. Because I'm going to say I'm a bit sceptical about the timing of it too, because we ratified OPCAT 5 years ago now. All of the signatories know that these inspections are coming. And in fact, just only a matter of months ago, actually, the state legislated, we passed a new bill for an inspector of detention services, which I raised at the time, could have been the perfect vehicle to facilitate these kinds of inspections more generally. And we proposed that it be expanded to kind of cover off on all of our OPCAT obligations. The excuses that the government's put up for not allowing the inspections to go ahead, to be honest, seem a bit, a bit scurrilous. And so, the Premier's answer said something like there are legislative barriers. So we, in fact, Amy McMahon, Greens member in South Brisbane, put in a question on notice following up, asking, what are these barriers? You answering question time said, we couldn't do it for this reason, we'll sort it out later. But what are the barriers that actually stop them from doing it now? Because you're absolutely right, Deanne. It's a bloody embarrassment. And look, the damage to our reputation has been done. We obviously can't go back in time and rectify that now. But the least we can do, is make sure that we're facilitating it for next time. But ultimately, along with what we've heard from legal experts, the current law should actually have allowed these inspections to take place, and it feels like it was an excuse. So what are they hiding? Like, what are they concerned about the inspectorate seeing? It feels like a bit of a worry. But yeah, really important issue, Deanne. I appreciate you asking. Next question. Question is from Van Helen on Instagram. Seats to watch for the Queensland state election. Can we be justifiably optimistic about electing extra Greens to Queensland Parliament? Well, I'll go out on a limb and I'll say yes, we can be optimistic. The federal election result was obviously an incredibly exciting one for us. And the sorts of swings that we saw in the federal election put at least 2 extra seats well within reach. That kind of overlap with those key Brisbane areas, the seats. So if you look at the federal seats now that are held by the Greens, that's Brisbane, Ryan and Griffith, they cover a huge part of metropolitan Brisbane. So, that covers seats like Cooper and McConnell and maybe even more if you look at all of those overlapping seats like Greenslopes. Miller's had really good results in recent years. Moggill and Clayfield, there are a whole bunch of different seats that are potentially in play. So I guess I'm also, in the context of the last state election, which we know was very, pretty seriously affected by COVID and a more kind of conservative, but like a retreat to much more traditional historical voting patterns. I think we could expect next time round to see the swings away from the major parties continuing, because that is the historical trend. And especially with Queensland Labor really maintaining a pretty conservative position on so many issues, like failing to properly address social housing, like investing in it to the extent we need to address, all the housing insecurity and the crisis generally. They won't look at things like rent caps to protect renters in that circumstance. They're still approving new coal and gas mines and kind of falling in line almost behind the LNP's pressure on this tough on crime nonsense. They're fundamentally not particularly progressive positions. They don't reflect what the community wants to see. So especially as that community sentiment was expressed in the federal election. So yeah, look, we can take nothing for granted. We've got a lot of work to do as a party. And what's so exciting is that we've now got those 3 extra elected reps at the federal level to show the community what it means to have a Greens MP representing you. And I know that they'll be working like stink to engage with their communities and to offer useful, constructive responses to the issues that matter to people locally. So yeah, I am more than willing to maintain my optimism at this point. And incidentally, yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of my re-election and our election of the second Queensland Greens MP to the Queensland Parliament in Amy McMahon over in South Brisbane. So look, it's been an exciting spell for the party, and I'd really love to see that progress continue. In a couple of years' time, the countdown is on. Only 2 years. I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous to anyone who's not maybe as actively involved as we are, but wow, 2 years, not long. All right, nice one. Thanks, Van Helen. Next comment is from Susan on Facebook. The transport is so bad from Rainworth that we are considering moving. Unworkable for families where parents must commute to the CBD. I love this area and don't want to move. Yeah, look, as someone who, as recently as a week ago, lived in Barden, I can absolutely feel your pain. I mean, if you're trying to travel at the wrong time of day, it's absolutely atrocious. And I know that one of the big issues I think there is that locals in Barden and in parts of Paddington don't even have an easy way to catch buses or any public transport to really very local centres like Toowong and like St Lucia. I mean, St Lucia is the second biggest generator of trips, second only to the CBD in our whole region, but we can't get across suburbs to get there. So a lot of people are forced to take buses. Connections to the city, a lot of them are pretty pretty slow and infrequent. So, I mean, in peak hour, they're slow because they're stuck in all the same traffic that people are forced into because the service is not great. And then outside of peak hour, they're incredibly infrequent. So it's the worst of both worlds in some ways. We've been advocating specifically for better connections between Barton and Paddington and Toowong, but broadly for better buses in Barton. But those connections between Barton, Paddington, and Toowong, we think they can be best achieved by extending the 375 to terminate at the Toowong train station. So that gets you obviously to the train line, which is a great start. It gets you very close to those bus lines that will take you out to St. Lucia. That's the sort of stuff, that inter-suburban connection, that's really going to make a difference. There's also the 375, 475 and the Great Circle line buses. We really think that their frequency just needs to be dialed up a bit. People are going to be much more willing to get on a bus, to get out of cars and to reduce that, the extent of the traffic, if they know they can just walk out the door and expect to get a bus, in 10 minutes in peak hours, or even every 15 minutes is much easier to deal with. And in addition to that, the 475 could very easily connect up with the 375 and that extension of the 375 to Toowong at the interchange that they share at Kawula Street. I think they both end up there from memory. So yeah, look, we've got a petition running on this. I'll pop that in the comments at the end of this live. It's really not good enough that public transport is so bad on the west side. I've been lobbying about this for a long while, both to the Transport Minister and to Council, and we'll keep the pressure up. We had one no-brainer of a win, an additional school bus to connect Barton residents up to Kelvin Grove. They're literally in catchment and they couldn't get a bus that went from Barton to Kelvin Grove without going into the city and back out again, which is just silly. So, we can get changes and improvements to these systems, but again, it just requires that persistent pressure on the minister, and just got to keep shaking the can, get some more money out of them, so that folks doing the good work in TransLink can schedule more services for us. Look, we're getting pretty close to the end of time here, and I've got a few more questions. I might not quite get through them all, but I'll just keep moving through. So, a question from Jason on YouTube: can we get the free bicycle scheme back? Neuron and Beam are ripping us off with their pricing. Look, I assume you're talking about the City Cycle scheme, which they were decommissioned maybe just last year, essentially because they weren't used often enough. And I think from memory, I mean, I did use them quite a bit a few years back, and I think that they weren't free, but you could use your go card, and so it was pretty straightforward way to do it. But I guess I'm not that surprised. A lot of people feel quite reasonably reluctant to cycle in the city because it's so dangerous in so many parts, and especially before those the city separated cycle lanes came into place. There was just none of that in the areas where the city cycle centres were most prolific. So maybe instead of stopping that, we could have actually seen more investment in safe cycling infrastructure in Brisbane. Where we're at now, though, obviously with the Neuron and Beam services, this is one of the biggest problems with it, is that the problems now are kind of a consequence of private companies getting access to what could and probably should be a public service. I agree that they're not they're just too expensive. It is a bit of a rip-off. And I've heard from folks that their prices have gone up in the past few months, which, again, that's kind of an inevitability when you give a private profit-driven company exclusive access to provide a service like this. So there are other issues that fall out of that private service provision, like the companies refusing to take responsibility for the fleets. So as in, bikes, there was one example here locally where one of these bikes was just left blocking an entrance to someone's home, and this is someone who uses a wheelchair, and so he was literally trapped. He couldn't move the bike. Couldn't get someone to move it for him, and they were really unresponsive when it came to asking for them to just pick it up and get it out of the way. So, and in the end, I think what happened was that they didn't even move it. It was a community member that did help him out in the end. So, look, in terms of getting City Cycle back, I don't know what the chances are of that. It's one of those changes. Once this council's made a decision on an issue like that, it's almost safest to assume that you'd need someone else in council before they might decide to backpedal. Pardon the pun. All right, I'm going to take this as the last question from Bob on YouTube. What's a view you hold that might waver from party lines? It's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer because I think one of the best and simplest parts of this job for me is that I've always been able to put forward and to argue on behalf of a policy platform that is consistent with my own values system and my beliefs, and an approach that starts with evidence-based policy. But obviously evidence can't fill all the gaps. There are political questions, there are political elements to just about any policy. So setting our policy through a process of grassroots engagement with members is actually, I think, a really constructive way of doing that. And again, kind of filling those political gaps in the evidence with a kind of consistent values-driven perspective that represents all of those things that not just Greens members have in common, but people across society. I guess being able to represent that policy and the initiatives that it kind of precipitates during election periods and in Parliament is not as hard as you might think it is. So, look, I'm accountable to the members of the Greens if at any point if I vote in a way, because obviously policy sometimes leaves some gaps in applying it to specifics of legislation. So if I vote in a way that people in the party think is inconsistent with policy, I can be held accountable before the kind of main decision-making body of the party. And voters, obviously, I'm directly held to account by them every 4 years. So, look, the short answer to your question is I really can't think of one. I think there are some issues where the party's position is misrepresented in such a way that I clearly disagree with the way that it's misrepresented. But yeah, if you look to the policy, I think I'm really broadly on board with with the policies that the party set, and that said, they're also being updated. We're in the midst of a policy review process. So this is, I guess, just a shout out to anyone who's really, I know that there are folks who are really interested in this stuff and who want to be engaged and contribute to policy development. So that comes directly from our membership up. So if you want to engage with that, then it's easy. Sign up, become a member, join the policy committee, and spend your life in really exciting, interminably frequent meetings. No, that was not a good sales pitch. No, but it's great. It's a great opportunity to engage with the party in the shape of the policies that we're bringing. So, all right, that is it. It's bang on 7:00. I feel like I've succeeded with roughly managing the timeframes. Quick comment from Kyle, just here to say, I think you're doing a great job representing your community. Thanks, Kyle. It's really nice to hear. It's a pretty amazing community that I've been elected to represent. Oh, it's Kylie. Sorry, not Kyle. Thanks, Kylie. Yeah, I'm really lucky to have this job. Like, it's a real privilege to be able to do the work I do. I'm supported by an incredible team who help me in all sorts of ways, not just by pointing out when I've misread someone's name. So this is a good chance for me to say a huge thanks to the team, to everyone who kind of does all of that legwork behind the scenes, because we work really hard to be useful. You know, everyone who we represent here in Maiwar, and so many others who we don't, being useful, listening and conveying those views to to the Parliament and fighting for them in the political system is something that is perhaps not done as well as it could be across the board in politics. So yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. Very proud to be a representative. Look, I think there are plenty more questions that I would have liked to answer. If you've got a really burning question that you want to follow up on after this, please just email or call the office. We're not difficult to find online, or I guess even just comment on the posts or any of the socials, and we'll endeavour to respond to those too. But yeah, it's obviously the inbox is probably slightly it might take a little bit longer, but you're also a bit more likely to get a response more reliably. I did just also note there are a few folks who are commenting about 476 visa delays. I'd just encourage you to get in touch with your federal MP, who can sometimes help out and advocate on your behalf. They have better direct avenues through to the Immigration Department than we have. So there are a few things that I did say I would post links to in the comments. There's the local campaign I mentioned at the start of the video. In fact, there are a few of them. So the Long Pocket Bus campaign, Victory Pocket Buses, and the Lambert Road Bikeway, the Better Buses petition in Barden. I can't think of anything else that I mentioned. So, but look, again, just reach out if there's anything more that you want to get more info on that I've touched on here. Happy to help out. But otherwise, thanks for being here. I hope it was as fun for you as it was for me. And we'll do this again sometime. Well, not this year, but perhaps in the new year. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Really nice to see you, and take care. Bye.